Hello, everyone.
What a giant
How are
head.
you doing?
Look at that giant head of mine. Oh my God. What happened? Hello.
And so, hello. So we're still waiting on somebody else. A couple of people are having some difficulties getting into the room. So I'm going to hop out real quick just so that I can attend to them. And so, so maybe the two of you can get to know each other a little bit. Jeff, this is Ilana. Ilana, this is Jeff. You're both amazing writers. I'm so happy and stoked to have you both here. So I will be back in just a moment.
Hi.
I looked you up online right before, and now I'm really intimidated.
No, really? Because that's exactly how I feel. I feel like I'm the Hawkeye of the Avengers right now. You guys are all like real freaking writers of novels. I don't know why Neal put me on this panel. Oh my God.
Maybe everyone has that feeling.
Let us hope, because I'm just like, I'm going to be quiet and like just listen to you all talk, basically.
No, don't do that.
I haven't actually read you yet, though. You're on my list, but I haven't read you. What should my first book be? Yeah.
I wrote one trilogy.
Okay.
So
just start it. Just start the trilogy.
Ideally, this is here. I took these to be next to me. How do I do this with the camera? This is my first book, Last Song Before Night.
Okay.
And where do I? You have done so much. Where?
Yeah, it reads like a lot. It is just a really like, what do they tell the kids? It's not the years, it's the mileage. It's just a lot of haphazard trying to earn money by writing. It's not like
that's a modest way of putting it.
I promise you, I'm absolutely not modest. Just telling it.
If it helps, I haven't made any money at all, so just approaching it from opposite ways. I can say we're not on camera yet. I can say that to you.
Be careful. I think we might be live. You and I might be live.
You know what?
So
though?
Don't tell any secrets.
Okay.
I would say this. You look back after 10 years of doing something. Hello. And people come in at the end and they're like, oh, they do a quick scan of it and they go, oh, look at all these accomplishments. But when you were in the middle of it, this magazine, holy crap, it's Tad Williams.
I have no idea what that means, but if I owe you money, I apologize.
That is the winning comments of the con today.
Oh my God.
Hello, everybody. Sorry to be so last minute-y.
Well,
not at all.
That's well. Actually, you're not last minute. We still have a minute technically before this shindig is supposed to start.
I think technically that qualifies as last minute, Neal.
We still have. I know Tim Powers was having some difficulties earlier because when we did a check because he was trying to do some stuff with. I think originally he was trying to join with his tablet, and I guess his tablet was of an age that it might not be happy. So he said he was going to try it with his phone. So I hope that works today. We'll see. So anyway, I will go ahead and get the panel rolling here while we're waiting on Tim. And so anyway, first of all, I want to say thank you for all of you amazing people to accepting my invites. I will be absolutely show no shame in saying that I am fans of all of your works. I'm huge. I think you guys are amazing, and we just spent the last hour talking about games and stuff, and a particular game called Betrayal at Krondor. And even though it was based on the works of Raymond D. Feist, the person who actually was sitting by my desktop that I was constantly referring to was actually Tad's book, Dragonbone Chair. That was sort of my style thing, because he's been an inspiration for me for many years, and so I show absolutely no shame. I'm your biggest fan in the world, and I would fight anybody to the death for that honor.
I have nothing to say except thank you.
And I want to say the same thing about a author that I've only recently got to know, Ilana, that's sitting here on our panel. I felt terrible because her most recent book unfortunately just came out under COVID. And of course, she lost all of her book signings and all this other stuff.
Oh my god! That's so awful.
So she just, and so I felt whenever, because I had a spate in the hospital for about a month and a half at the beginning of this year, and she was very sweet and very dear. And when I got home, there was a copy of her most recent book at home for me, and so I love her to death. And so I'm happy to have here. Jeff's just bum. Jeff and I have known.
He should not be here. Why did you do this to me? I am not qualified to be on this panel. Why?
Jeff, I've seen what you have to say many times. You are more than qualified.
Yes, yes.
God.
And he is awesome folks to have here. And David is actually someone new that I'm just learning about. The wonderful thing about running a convention and doing stuff is that you get to meet new people and new authors. And so I am sure I'm going to fall as deeply in love with your work as I have everyone else that's here. You were, we had originally planned to have Elizabeth Hand with us, but unfortunately she had other things that she had to do, so she had to drop out. But she's the one who told us about David. And honestly, if I get a recommendation from Elizabeth Hand, I'm absolutely taking that recommendation. She's a fantastic writer, and I'm just more than happy to have you here, David. So I'm looking forward to reading Acacia and the whole series. And so, and also you do some other stuff too. So we'll kind of touch on that stuff. So it's one or two. It doesn't look like I've heard from Tim, but if he manages to get to us, I will drop him in. But in the meantime, let's get this party started. So first of all, I just want you to go down the line here and tell us who you are and why. What are you doing here?
I don't know, Neal.
Ilana, why don't we start with you?
Sure. My name is Ilana C Meyer. This year I finished my first fantasy trilogy. First novel of the trilogy is Last Song Before Night. I even brought a visual aid. The series continues with Fire Dance and The Poet King. It's a series that draws on a lot of different types of mythology. And it was really exciting to finish it, and I was looking forward to promoting my series this year. So thank you, Neal, for giving me this opportunity. This is kind of like my book tour for the year, and I appreciate it.
All right,
who's next? Wait,
Can't hear you, Neal.
We lost you, Neal. No sound, baby.
Sorry, I've been muting my microphone, just trying to avoid feedback here. So, Jeff, since you're next here in the box, why don't you go ahead and take a crack at this?
I represent the cowardly contingent. I am not in the realm with these other people. I don't know why Neal forced me to do this. My name is Geoff Thorne. I am primarily a TV writer and some comics and a few forays into the fantasy realm. I have a novel called Winter of the Wild Hunt, and a whole bunch of short stories in various small magazines, and some novellas. And for these purposes, I am the apprentice. So I will be sitting back and listening to the geniuses talk.
Okay, so let's go ahead and ask Tad here to step in.
Okay. Hi, I'm Tad Williams. I write fantasy and science fiction, the Dragonbone Chair books, the Shadow March books, some other land books, various books. I just would like to say to Jeff that really honestly, the only difference is that, you just have to stick around a long time. And it's amazing how much respect you get simply by not dying. So,
okay.
I was a punk kid once, and now I'm like, I don't know, some kind of elder statesman figure. And really honestly, it mostly seems to be not dying. That's my success. I intend to keep that up for a while longer. So,
yes, please.
Yeah, so there you go. So, but I do have one question for David before he introduces himself, which is, how did you manage to not have reflections from your screen on your glasses? Please tell me. Look at you.
Yeah.
You look gorgeous.
Gorgeous, darling.
You know what? I have look. There's a reflection. Kind
Oh
of.
yeah. Well, now in close up.
No,
Tiny little. There you go. Wow.
Thanks. Now I'm all set. Right. Okay. So introducing myself then. Very glad to be here. And what do? So I write books. I have 7 novels so far. As Neal mentioned, they're a combination of genres. I began with historical fiction, and initially about the African American experience, and then about the ancient world, about Hannibal in Rome, and War with Rome, and Spartacus as well. I had an epic fantasy series a few years back, Acacia. It was a trilogy. I also write for George R.R. Martin's Wildcards series of novels. Been doing that for a while now. Did some TV stuff recently, but I don't know if I could talk about it or not.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, don't.
They'll find you. Don't. Okay. If there's any doubt, don't talk about it.
I'm worried. And my next novel is a middle grade fantasy set in a solar punk ancient Egypt. That's out next year. That's me.
Okay.
Awesome. So I guess I just want to kick off the panel by kind of discussing. So this is a fantasy, writing panel, and so I guess the first question is that what for each of you when you're writing a fantasy novel? I mean, I realize that this is kind of an arbitrary label that's more about marketing than it is about something. I don't think that most people sit down and say, "Here's a label that I'm going to write to." We discussed this in the Afrofuturism panel a little bit earlier. But for you, what is sort of a necessary components for you to consider something fantasy? And so, does anybody want to weigh in on that first?
I mean, magic.
Oh, everybody's being all modest and shy. Come on, I can always talk, but everybody who knows me knows that already. So I have something to say, but I'm very willing to wait. No, you're going to put me on.
Wow.
All right.
Here we go.
Somebody, not me, wants to find the difference between fantasy and science fiction as fantasy takes place in an imaginary past or an imaginary present. Science fiction takes place in an imaginary future or an imaginary present, but obviously one has more to do with technology. I'm always frustrated. I'll try to keep this short. I'm always frustrated, not just by the fact of how marketing and genre-driven things have become, because most of my favorite writers moved freely in and out of science fiction and fantasy. But I'm also a little frustrated sometimes with how I understand that if you like a certain flavor of ice cream, you don't really necessarily want to try a lot of other flavors. But the more that we narrow down the marketing, the more people tend to buy what I personally think of as kind of mediocre work that's in the same subgenre they already like, rather than trying more kinds of things. And we're all guilty of that sometimes. So I'm not claiming some kind of moral superiority. But I personally, just the idea comes to me, usually it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly whether it's something that the publishers and marketers are going to call one thing or another, but it's certainly not part of how I think about something when an idea is forming. End of story. Okay.
Jeff, you sounded like you were trying to say something there, so I'm going to let you hop in here.
If it has a magical component, it's fantasy. That's, to me, and you can hyphenate it with whatever else is going on, but that's for me. That's it. I don't go in going, oh, here I am writing a fantasy, whatever. It's just this one has magic in it.
I think I'm gonna. Hi. I'm gonna just tilt the question a little bit because I don't think we need to really. I don't feel impelled to define what fantasy is because we can talk about that forever, but. And I think Jeff is right that, if there's magic, it's fantasy, right? So I'd rather address what draws me to write it in the first place, which is, for me personally, the appeal of fantasy is nothing interests me more than the human heart, the human condition, And I feel like when we have the freedom of fantastical elements, we can go deeper in some ways than we can when we are not, than when we are limited without those elements. If I'm making myself clear there.
That makes absolute sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just talking about what personally draws me to it. I look for books that do that. When I'm writing, I'm always thinking about, I mean, it's fun to bring in, magic that goes flashbang, whatever, but really what I'm always thinking about is how does this fantastical element explore and really plumb the depths of what's going on with the characters.
Actually, I have an addendum thought, if I can toss that on to what Ilana is saying, which is that I think oftentimes, again, we're, it's weird to get too involved in designations or marketing things, but basically, I think one of the differences also is that, to generalize, a lot of times science fiction tends to be problem-oriented. Sometimes, especially the older science fiction, very puzzle-oriented, whereas fantasy fiction is often about, I think, externalizing internal conflicts, in a sense. We are taking feelings and conflicts that we all have, but then we are externalizing them by creating outside things that kind of mark them, which is why there are so many journeys, because it mimics the journey of life from childhood to adulthood, etc. There are so many quests because we are talking about trying to confront important things in our lives, etc., etc. So I think that's also maybe a part of what Ilana is talking about why we are often in fantasy are drawn to the human story as opposed to merely, kind of problem solving or, postulating and hypothesizing, which is much more of a science fiction thing.
David, you have some thoughts?
Sure, yeah. That's certainly a good answer. I'll kind of go back to Ilana and approach it from a personal perspective. I've written 3 historical novels, last of those being a big ancient war epic, 250,000 words, epic fantasy size, but historical. And looking to the next project, I wanted to do something big again, but I was reading a lot more fantasy and science fiction and finding that the story I wanted to tell would be hard to tell kind of trapped in the confines of our geography and our history. And instead, I wanted to be able to kind of slam together different things and shake up the geography of the world and pull from bits of history and put things together that side by side that weren't before. And it felt like, fantasy is the place to do that. There is magic, of course, that's key to it as well, and that grew. But it was that desire to tell a story that did not seem like it could easily fit within a realistic setting. And that's what made the shift happen for me.
So just when you think you're out, it pulls you back in.
That's what Jeff is going to be saying all day today.
You bastard! Oh my God! Just do me this little thing. Sure.
By the way, Jeff's the one who's got the cool background. So what exactly is your cool background there? I can't quite see it.
It's the logo of my my little small press Winterman books. My actual room, you guys all look so lovely and authory. Mine is a junkyard, so y'all ain't getting to see that. Y'all ain't getting to see that.
See, this. Trust me, this is all about stagecraft. Because if we pan this camera left or to the right, it is waste. It's basically corners, right? Yeah. So this is the pretty part that you get to see.
Everyone wants the logo instead of what's really behind me. I'm just telling you. Right?
Yeah, but as Neal's saying, if you could see below desk level here, our daughter recently rescued a bunch of quail chicks. So I've got all these boxes full of quail crap all over.
Oh my God, that's sweet.
Because we're having a standoff as to who has to clean up. So it's been a couple days now. So anyway, yeah. So Never make assumptions. That's the whole point of fiction. We only let people see what we want them to see. So.
Exactly right. Because this is fantasy after all, right?
Absolutely.
So it's a magic trick, y'all. It's always a magic trick.
So on that subject, let's talk about magic tricks, or more specifically about magic. And so that I know that you all have your own take on sort of what magic is or whatever. So what is it about magic particularly that compels you? And do you have any particular thoughts on the way it works on your universe that you feel sets yours apart from the way other people handle it?
You can't make that many noises and not start.
Well, I really don't feel qualified. I haven't written enough.
Oh,
so,
please.
For me, one of the reasons I delve into whenever I'm writing quote unquote fantasy stuff, I generally am using a different system than one I've seen before. It's not that I dislike the other systems. It's just, well, what if it was like this? What if it worked like this? And they vary from story to story. So there's one where all the god realms, Heliopolis, Asgard, all that, they're basically their own sort of supra Earth. They all exist on an Earth. It's just a different kind of Earth than ours. So magic there would be the basis for physics, and their societies are built on that. But then another story is just a city where magic works the way you expect it to work. And it's the one city in the United States where everyone just goes, oh, yeah, that's magic. And it can be dragons. It can be, Harry Potter-esque wand casting and all that kind of stuff. It's sort of a built-in pastiche sort of thing. I would kick it over to Tad, though, because when I read War of the Flowers, I was fascinated with your sort of time passing in fairy at roughly the same rate it's passed out here, and like how their society developed parallel, I guess.
Yeah, more or less.
But that it was sort of an extrapolation of, well, if this is true, then and this amount of time goes by in a society that's not static, what would they do? And that to me was fascinating. That kind of thing is fascinating. The Earthbender, the Airbender TV show starts out with their own version of magical system, but when they come back, it's also converted into steampunk at the same time. And I'm like, what are you people doing? So I feel like the story sort of dictates, but that's, as I say, I'm kind of a fledgling in this realm. So.
But now we're all going to look at you anyway.
Yeah, I know, assholes.
I just very quickly, since I've been given the close up again, just had time to put my diet smoke and my Diet Coke and my vape down, so as to keep my image pure and wholesome. No, really, honestly, that's one of the values about having close-ups, is that you can do stuff off screen while other people are. But now you've completely screwed the whole thing. There's Tim.
Yay, Tim!
All right. I always have lots to say, so let's let Tim say some things first.
Yeah. So Tim, thank you. I'm so sorry that you're having trouble getting in, but I'm so glad that you're able to join us, because this panel is not really complete without you. And so, if you would kind of quickly, since everyone's had a chance to introduce themselves, so just have you tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name's Tim Powers, etc.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, along this.
Fill in the etc. part a little bit.
As if I'd been here at the beginning, yeah. I'm Tim Powers, and I've written a number of fantasy novels, 16 of them. And I don't know, that's about it, I guess.
So one thing that the panel is currently discussing is basically their ideas about magic in terms of how it works, or if you feel that the way you present magic in your books is something that's unique or different maybe than the way other people do it, or just what's your own kind of particular take on magic?
Usually, I figure that magic is bad for the practitioner. It's sort of forcing the engine in unnatural ways, and while it can get results, I usually imagine it as diminishing the practitioner. If you practice magic for very long, many years, you're likely to wind up with less IQ than what you started with.
So it's kind of like writing fantasy, is what it's like.
Oh my God!
Oh, that's cold.
Dude,
I'm putting myself in that category too.
I know that's a lot of self-hate there, man. Come on.
Sorry. I've got to have people soloed here. Sorry. Ilana, what about you? I mean, you have a whole academy devoted to magic. Of course, it's through the one thing I really was interested about the way you handled magic in your books. And so, would you kind of let the audience know a little bit about sort of your particular unique approach to magic?
Okay, well, I can talk about the premise of the novels that you just mentioned, which is that there is an academy for poets, and the world in which my novels take place, poets have magical and political power. In the beginning, they don't have their magical powers anymore, so it's actually more like an ivory tower institution for rich kids. And then it starts to become something more connected to the actual art, because I was really interested in exploring the kind of tension between political power and artistic integrity. In terms of the way magic is manifest in the novels, I tend to be, I have this tension where I'm very aware. I don't want people to be like, I don't want readers to feel like the magic is just used for convenience or that it's too easy. It's very important to not do that. But at the same time, I'm resistant to the idea of a magic system. That just doesn't resonate for me, because I think of magic as something mysterious, something that can't be fully grasped. Maybe this is a hangover from my growing up extremely religious. I grew up Orthodox Jewish. And I was always, very aware of this, ineffable presence, behind everything. And I, don't have those, I don't necessarily subscribe to that belief system anymore, but maybe it informed the way I approach magic. I feel like there's a lot of mystery in the universe, and that's what magic is connected to. So there's always that balance for me between trying to have the magic not to be too convenient, to make some kind of sense, but also not be like completely systematized and, so explicable that it loses its mystery.
That's great. David, I'm putting you on the spot here. And so specifically magic was one of the things that Elizabeth had told me about your books and something she really enjoyed. And it sounded like you had a different way of approaching it than a lot of other people did. And so maybe you could talk to us a little bit about your universe or the way you approach magic.
I'll try. It's actually kind of funny, because as I'm listening to folks and thinking about your question, I'm realizing things about how the way I approach magic has changed. What binds them between the Acacia Trilogy and the Shadow Prince middle grade books that I'm doing now is the magic is tied to gods in some way or another. In the case of Acacia, if you believe their mythology, I guess I do, the magic was essentially the language of the creator god. And someone followed him around as he was creating things and did the best he could to write down the language that God spoke in. And that became basically a language of magic. But there was quite a price for that. It's that translation was filled with imperfections. So as people try to use this language of God, they can do kind of amazing magical things, but also in the process, they are sort of creating kind of like magical nuclear waste. And there are ways that there are residual effects to having, it's not clean energy, it's not clean magic. So that's kind of where that first one came from. And it's also in song, that the creator God was singing the world into creation. So to some degree, magicians are singing when they're using magic. So that's that one. And then with the new project, the middle grade one, set in ancient Egypt, in that case, the magic is a fusion of the god's power, of Ra's power, and the sun, all kind of right in there with Egyptian mythology. And in that case, though, I guess I'm writing for kids, and I am looking to create sustainable magic and to support sustainable resources going forward. So in many ways, there's a more positive bent on that use of magic, and it's used to create a kind of a solar-powered, cool ancient Egyptian world, which hopefully is something we can get to as well in whatever ways we're going to find positive ways to use energy. So there you go. Something about the gods.
Well, it's sort of like the old Dungeons and Dragons kind of thing, whether you're talking about clerical magic or you're talking about other stuff. And so there's different kinds of approaches. I'm sort of wrestling with those issues in the novel I'm working on right now. The one thing that you touched on, actually, I'd like to talk a little bit about is the question of setting. Is the fact that fantasy does not have a single setting. I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people tend to go immediately to think about J.R.R. Tolkien and some kind of medieval, rustic, European kind of approach to stuff. But obviously, you're all kind of working in different worlds with stuff. And so I'd like for each one of you to talk a little bit about it. Is what informs yourself about world settings? What is the thing that attracts you most about the settings that you tend to work in? And so, does anyone want to take that question first, or?
Well, Tim's had the least chance to talk.
Yeah, so it's Tim.
I don't want to put him. I don't want to volunteer him under the bus or anything.
So, Tim, would you like to weigh in on that? Oh, wait, I think Tim may be frozen. So, so for the moment,
wow.
I hope.
Well, that's good actually, because
I hope that's an artifact of his camera.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Tim, at the moment.
Okay. So
I'll take a shot. It actually ties in a little bit with some of the earlier stuff. I may be the most sort of Tolkien inspired of everybody, and certainly that kind of early beginning pushed me along into what I would call a kind of hard fantasy, where I'm very interested, if I'm going to create an alternate world, I'm very interested in how that world works. In part just because it's fun for me. I mean, I wrote a series of, wrote 3 urban fantasies about an earthbound angel, and in the second one he goes to hell. And I spent most of my time preparing to write that book, trying to figure out how this version of hell would actually work. I mean, would it serve its purpose? If it exists as a quasi-physical place, obviously when you're talking about souls and stuff, it's, not really physical, but if you're talking about it, how would it work, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things, just to make my answer no longer than it has to be, one of the things with world building for me that's super interesting is kind of once the thought happens, you just start asking the what if questions, and you just ask and ask and ask. And unfortunately or fortunately, whatever question you ask, it's like a Mandelbrot set. You just keep opening new possibilities. But getting through as many of those as possible is how I build a world in my head. So it will tend to be a little rule based. That doesn't mean I try to figure out how every magical spell would work, but it does mean, and again, this is just personal preference, it means that I'm trying to figure out how to make this feel for me like a real world. So that's a big part of it, is the asking of questions, the attempt to understand it as if I was coming in contact, instead of with an imaginary civilization that I haven't finished making yet, as if I was coming into contact with a real civilization and trying to understand it.
So David, I'd like to hop back to you for just a second, simply because so you kind of started off this conversation. So tell me about what's the compelling thing about sort of this Egyptian kind of approach for you in terms of that's kind of informing your approach to your world building.
This novel or this series, it's just the first of hopefully quite a few. The only book that kind of came to me kind of fully formed in a way one day. That was the summer a few years back. I was out mowing the lawn. I was home alone, and my neighbors was an Egyptologist, and my son had borrowed a book of his. So I was taking a break, having a drink, and I was flipping through this book of ancient Egyptian gods, and I found them so fascinating and funny and kind of weirdly contradictory, and fell in love with that. And it immediately felt like the material for a light and kind of comedic middle grade take on ancient Egypt and the Egyptian gods. That's where it came from. I tried to write other stuff about ancient Egypt with mixed success, but there was something about tapping into it in a whimsical manner with an eye toward a young audience that I think worked. And yeah, that's where it came from. With the Acacia Trilogy, that was a desire, and that was published back in 2007 is when it began. It was a real desire to see more of the world's cultural diversity reflected in fantasy. And in my case, I included Europe, but I kind of began it centered on more of a Mediterranean power, and also included an African power or many African powers. So that the centering of the world was different, as well as expanding around the world. That felt really important, and I loved fantasy growing up, but very rarely was I seeing characters that represented parts of the world that my people have been from. So I was excited about that. I'm even more excited about the other people who are kind of diving fully into that at the moment. Lydia Corfor and Vonda Lee, and Rebecca Rowanhorse, Shannon Chakraborty. And there's so much out there, so many world cultures that are ripe for getting the fantasy treatment that we're finally getting now. That excites me a lot. And I'm glad to be reading stuff other people are doing.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, Ilana, one of the things that I'm going to crib from Tad here is that he said something in the beginning of the Dragonbone Chair. He's talking about the fact that you be careful of making assumptions about what you're reading because they are a little bit different than you might immediately realize. And so
I remember that.
Yeah, and so I remember that after all of these years, and so. So that's the one thing that struck me about your novels, and so that it seemed to me is the fact that there are some things that feel very familiar, and there's also some things about them that feel very different. And so I want to kind of talk about you pulled on some of your own ethnic background for some of the stuff for some of the settings for your book. So I wonder if you would just kind of touch on that a little bit, please.
Oh, you mean the Jewish stuff?
Yes. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, the Jewish stuff.
I'm just clarifying that. I'm teasing you a little bit.
Yes.
I mean, that ends up being a really small part of it, but at the same time, it's something I haven't seen in fantasy, which is not to say it's not out there. I just haven't seen it, where there is, a people who are analogous to, because, I'm creating this world, right? I'm writing about the Celtic poets. And so therefore, in order to make the setting commensurate with the inspiration, it's basically this European medieval setting in the first book. And then I have all these, I have this cast of characters. They're basically Christians, right? Because, and I'm like, wait a minute, Christian Europe had Jewish people, so I should really do something about this. So I had some characters who are from this smaller people that everyone hates, that everyone thinks is obsessed with money. And it ends up being somewhat important in the story. And I kind of messed with people's expectations a little by making them blonde because I'm tired of the stereotypes on TV. But it was sort of, it was almost a private joke for me because I didn't expect anyone to notice or pick up on it. And the fact that the city of Tamerlane in the first book ended up being influenced by Jerusalem is really just because I was living in Jerusalem at the time. And these like Mediterranean influences started creeping in. And I was like, I'll just go with it because, there's elements of the troubadours in this book as well. So it works. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fine. I will let you know there are no right or wrong answers on this panel. So there will not be a quiz at the end.
Okay.
But so Jeff, I want to hop over to you and talk about your settings. Your settings have not necessarily been the traditional fantasy, or at least not sort of what has been in a lot of the past.
Most of my stuff falls in the subgenre of urban fantasy, I suppose. What modern audiences would call urban fantasy. I tend to want to mix genres overall. So I have a heavy noir component in a lot of my fantasy fiction. Not all of it, but I would say 90% of it. I'm interested in the if I was a better writer, you'd call it magical realism, I suppose. But I'm interested in the.
If you had a better agent.
That too. Why can't I have Michael Crichton's agent? But the interplay between what we traditionally think of as magic, and a sort of more gritty, grounded sort of life, and how do people respond to that. I'm very much in love with this sort of current wave front of inclusion, which is simply enough people said, screw it, I want to play too, more than anything else. And there's just so many different kinds of approaches to magic. But I guess for me, the systems are less important than the story that's being told at the moment. Whatever I'm trying to do with that particular story. So I created this place called Arcana, which is sort of a city you can find if you are meant to find it. And it is a sort of a New York, urban America version of maybe Ursula Le Guin's Roke Island, right? Where everyone there is somewhere, whether they use magic or not, they're sort of used to it. One of my favorite descriptions was when Ged gets to Roke, and the people who live on the island don't actually use magic, but they built their city and their culture around this college where everyone uses magic. So they're like the least impressed by magic people on Earth. They're just like, yeah, but you still have to pay for these fries, man. I don't care about it. And adorable, you're an adorable bunny, but you better pay for that cloth you're trying to walk away with, and I just like that vibe very much, so I tried to mess around with that. I haven't built a big world yet in the way that these others have, a whole giant world. They're more like excuses to tell certain kinds of stories right now. In Winter of the Wild Hunt, I did want to mess around with the idea of one of the things I love about fairy mythology, Faerie mythology, is that the Celts are not the only people who came up with that. That's sort of ubiquitous around the planet. There's some version of that in most cultures. And most of the Irish Celtic mythology in dealing with the Fae basically is don't fuck with these guys. It's not like Aesop's fables or a biblical story where you're supposed to get some moral lesson out of it. It's like, if these people talk to you, don't eat their food, don't dance with them, don't mess around with them sexually, just give them a wide berth, which to me speaks to some sort of basis in reality, because why all these warning stories? Like, I'm never going to meet a dragon. There's not a lot of stories about, okay, if you ever meet a dragon, carry some Molly with you, because they hate that. There's nothing like that. Right. But there's a shitload of stories about don't mess with these people. Don't sleep in their houses. Don't eat with it. Don't take their gifts. And I'm like, what is this? So I wanted to explore what that really meant, what kind of beings these beings might be. So Winter of the Wild Hunt sort of came somewhat out of that, and it is also a pastiche sort of story in that it mixes science fiction with fantasy in an odd way. People were, some of the criticisms of it, both positive and negative, were like, wait, I thought this was this kind of story. And I was like, I don't know who told you that. Like, why would you? It's not on the back of the book. Why would you assume that? Right? But that's why I'm only half joking when I say, when I look at the work of these other people, they're the kind of writers that got me into wanting to write it, and the reason I use fantasy realms is what's been said here already, is that you can stretch out and flex a bit more in certain directions without repercussion, without having to worry about where the real world walls are. I'm a big fan of Roger Zelazny's work, and I really love My Princess in Amber because it sort of jumped around between all these different things, and it had a baseline set of rules, but it was very much a magical story, a story about magic, but it had a science fiction patina over all of it, which I was just like, yeah, that's for me. So, I don't know if that answers the question exactly.
Yeah, oh no, it's great. So the one thing that about you talk to people about fantasy or whatever, and some people who say, well, you have the camps. Well, I only read science fiction, or I only read horror, or I only read fantasy, or what have you. And sometimes the criticism is that, well, but fantasy is just pure escapism. There's nothing. It has nothing to do with reality or real things. And so I'd like your own takes on that idea.
That's nonsense.
I think so many of these kinds of questions are, how can I put it? I mean, they're the kinds of things we talk about, but when you're actually writing, in my experience anyway, they very much fall to the back. Just very briefly, I mean, because it's a lot of what I think Jeff was talking about, and certainly, I mean, genre fiction in general. My analogy for genre fiction is often like the difference between ballet, classical ballet, and modern dance. And the thing is that a genre is a form of boundaries. It's a set of boundaries. Not even boundaries so much as it's a kind of an agreement with the audience. And the kind of joking way I usually phrase it is like, my readers will be willing for me to do anything in any direction, as literary or strange or whatever as I want, as long as every 10 pages something tries to eat one of the main characters. You can tell I've wrote just that one a few times, but it's essentially true. And I love that, actually. It's one of the reasons I became a genre writer, is because I love genre fiction. I grew up loving genre fiction, and particularly in my case, fantasy, science fiction, some crime fiction, things like that. But essentially, most of these bargains we're making long before we start the individual story. We're making them when we decide what kind of fiction we're going to try to write. And from that point on, it's what you do with the lineaments of the genre or subgenre that you're in that matters. So the great thing is that you can do anything, as David and Ilana and Jeff have all mentioned in some shape or form, and I think I have too. You can do anything you want, but again, it's a subgenre or a genre. You also have a certain amount of prior agreement with the audience, and if you don't fulfill any of those, kind of standards of what makes science fiction or fantasy, then you're going to have disappointed readers. But if you do that stuff, they give you a huge amount of freedom, and that's why our field is so broad, and there are so many people doing so many interesting things, both the old guard and people writing now, just getting published, because we're not about it must follow this pattern so much as here are the boundaries, here are the walls, and as long as you know they're there, do whatever you want. So it's, I don't know if this answers anybody's question, but it's definitely one of the reasons why I write this stuff. And I see it at least as an unconscious agreement with most writers in our field, that they kind of get that, even if they're not explicitly addressing it.
Let me ask you guys this. one of the things, because I'm primarily in a sort of sci-fi realm, whether I wish to be or not, like it sort of de facto becomes that. But with fantasy, I feel like there's an automatic sort of relaxation and not, I don't know if distancing is the right word, but like when you read a science fiction novel, most of them involve human beings, right? Like it's us as we are for the most part in most sci-fi novels, and then we're in this extraordinary situation. But the settings, even pushed forward into Blade Runner or Star Trek, are still relatively familiar to a modern audience by definition. But in fantasy, it literally almost every fantasy novel can start with Once Upon a Time, right? And or the what we think of the classic fantasy novel can start that way. And I feel like it allows the reader to not feel lectured to or dictated to by any particular thing, that they can say, oh, it's just a story, which is in a weird way subversive, because that's how you get under the gate. Oh, it's just a story. Whereas if you're reading a more modern, more grounded, quote unquote, science fiction novel, what's being talked about. Like, we're telling you X, we're saying this about this. Do you feel that that's true, or is it just some nonsense I just made up on the spot?
And you'll have to answer that question pretty quickly, because I'm going to have to start bringing this bird into land. So here in a minute. So
go ahead. I just talked.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I do think that's true. Certainly, when I think of writing the Acacia Trilogy, it was very much a series about corruption at a big national level and national mythology and a drug and slave trade. And lots of things that had real world inspiration, but casting them in a fantasy setting without the triggering labels attached to them, I think made me feel like I could write about those issues in ways that reflect on real world issues, but also hopefully slide them past anyone's initial gut reaction in opposition to them. So that felt fairly important, and I guess as I think about anything that I'm writing, and fiction, fantasy included, there has to be something about it that feels important in some way or another. But that can take so many different manifestations. Talking about the Egyptian series that I mentioned, it's light, it's for kids, it's meant to be fun and funny and mild peril. But also it's an entirely brown cast of characters from beginning to end. And I think that is something that I feel is a value of that book, even though otherwise it's just an entertainment. But always, there's always something I think that we can be digging at that is more than just entertainment.
Okay, that's great. So I'm gonna have to start pulling this to a stop, because I got my next panels rolling in already. So I just wanted to kind of quickly go down the panel and first of all, let us know what's the latest thing that you got out that we can go pick up, and also where do we find you online?
Ilana?
Oh, okay.
I'm volunteering you.
Okay. My novel that just came out in March is The Poet King, and it's the last of the series. Sorry, but it's probably best to start with the first novel of the trilogy. It's finished. It has an ending. I'm very proud of that. Where to find me online? I'm on Twitter, but you can find me there if you want.
I was really hoping for a personal home address.
Wow.
Maybe your schedule. No.
Good Lord.
Jeff?
I'm easy. Just go to geoffreythorne.com, and it's a sort of a clearinghouse for everything. And I would like to recommend 2 books. I saw somebody in the chat ask. I would like to recommend Dread Nation by Justina Ireland, and the Glamour and Glass series by Mary Robinette Kowal. You will find lovely magical systems there, and you will be well rewarded for delving.
Tad?
Mostly everything. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, and I have a website at tadwilliams.com. All of these, except for maybe Facebook, are largely curated by people other than me, like my wife Deborah Beal and other folks. But I am there, and I am posting on these things as regularly as I can. At the moment, I am. This just came out since we're holding up books. This is Empire of Grass. This is the second book of another god-awful huge trilogy, which is I don't set out to write this kind of, it's like a child before they're toilet trained. There are things that just happen to me, and I'm not sure exactly what causes them. But there are these big old things. So anyway, so that's the first official sequel to the Dragonbone Chair series that I wrote many, many years ago. I wanted to actually recommend one thing just to see. I don't know if Jeff's, since he was talking about a world where everybody uses magic and how fascinating that was. Do you know Alan Moore's top 10 comics?
Yes, top 10.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
good.
baby.
I was just going to say,
hell yeah.
That's a world where a city where everybody's a superhero, and it's dealt with brilliantly and humorously, and it's a really fun read. So I just wanted to recommend that to anybody who was
I knew you were awesome.
Enthused about what Jeff was talking about. So that's me done.
David?
Hey, and me. Website-wise, it's davidanthonydurham.com. Although it's kind of old, I need to update that thing. Maybe when the new book comes out, we'll revamp everything. The next series is the Shadow Prince, the Egyptian thing, but that was supposed to come out in June of next year. Now it's September of next year, COVID-related movement. So that's that. If you want something that's out now or that has been out, there's the Acacia Trilogy from, like I said, a few years back, but it's still, I think it holds up okay.
I've been meaning to read it.
So the next person that I would also like to just kind of shout out for Tim, who unfortunately lost. He's had just a devil of technical problems on his end. I really hated losing him, but I do want to go ahead and pimp his latest stuff. Is that just a little bit earlier he had Forced Perspectives coming out, which I think was a sequel to Alternate Routes. And then also, I cannot remember the title. I feel terrible, but he has a new book that's dropping in just like this week, I think. That is a sequel to the Anubis Gates. Wow. And so definitely go and check that stuff out. I want to thank all of my wonderful panelists here today. You're all geniuses, and I really appreciate you guys coming in and sharing your insights and everything else with us. Really appreciate it. And had a great time. I think the audience really enjoyed this as well. And so please take care of yourself. Stay safe with all this COVID stuff. And I hope I can chat with you guys in some other form sometime soon. You take care.
That's great. You guys are great.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing the con too, Neal.
Okay,
yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
All right.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, take care.
Bye-bye.